Today I'm going to tell you what I did differently to finally grow strawberries successfully. I have 5 tips for you today on growing strawberries, but one of them is really the biggest reason why I had success this year, and that is going to be about soil nutrition. Hi friends, I'm Katrina with Homegrown Florida, and I have been attempting to grow strawberries for about 5 years now. I have had some success. I have been able to perennialize my strawberries. I have been able to get some strawberries from my plants, but nothing like what has happened this season. And I'm going to tell you all about all the different things that I did to change that. The first tip is about varieties. So when I first started out, I bought strawberries at the big box store. And most of the time those are Abacon, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but those strawberries are ever-bearing strawberries, so they don't produce a huge amount or a large flush of berries all at once. They kind of give you a little bit of berries all throughout the season. The other thing to know about them is that they create a rather small berry, or at least in my experience, they have been typically much smaller than, say, this beast right here. Last year, I ventured into Chandler strawberries, which I like a lot. They had a harder time surviving our summer, and they did produce well, but there were a lot of other reasons why they didn't do as great. Although I do have them over in another one of my green stalks, and they are producing well, but not like this guy right here. This is called a Florida Brilliance, or just Brilliance. And they are a strawberry that was cultivated down here in Florida to be able to handle, our short daylight hours, our heat, our humidity, our soil conditions, all of those great things. And so they have produced magnificently for me. Now the Chandler and the Brilliance are what's called June-bearing strawberries. So there's ever-bearing like the Albicon, and then there's June-bearing like these two. And June-bearing means that you're going to get a huge flush of strawberries all at once, maybe a second one, but it's all within a very short period of time. So you're getting a bunch of berries. And then they peter out, and they maybe will give you 1 or 2 here and there, and then the rest of the year they do absolutely nothing. And here in Florida, that is very typical, because during the summer the strawberries do not want to flower and produce fruit. So our typical season runs anywhere from December to about April. Now the ever-bearing ones like the Albicon might produce a little bit earlier, and they may produce a little bit longer, but once again it's not these huge flushes of strawberries, it's 1 or 2 here and there, which is why I prefer June-bearing strawberries. The second tip I have for you is all around sun. So typically here in Florida, and I have said this on a number of videos, is that Florida sun is different than sun in other parts of the country, and boy is that true. So we have a higher intensity, so our heat index is much stronger than some other places up in the north. So normally I encourage people to use shade, but because strawberries are grown in our winter time frame, when the sun is a little less intense, the weather's a little bit more manageable, I actually am going to encourage you to put them in a place that gets full, and I don't mean Florida full, I mean full sun from morning to night. This is a spot in my yard that has 0 shade, and they have loved it. The other thing I'm going to encourage you, that if you're going to grow them in a vertical container like this green stalk, to get the rotating base. And not just any of their bases. Greenstock has 2 different types of bases. This one is the circular base that has like a shelf that rotates. It is so much easier to rotate than the other base, which is kind of like an octagon looking weird shape, and the way it rotates is from the wheels. This rotates from the base, not the wheels. In fact, I pulled the wheels off this one, and so it's just rotating straight off the base, and that helps with sunlight, because every day or 2 I will come through and I will rotate the base just a little bit, about a 1/4 turn, and so that way it gets full sun throughout the whole base. You can completely rotate it every day if you'd like, or half and half, or every 3 days. I wouldn't go longer than 3 days, but definitely rotate it so that all of these nice beautiful strawberry plants get all of that sun. Now the third tip I have for you about getting these gorgeous, beautiful, large strawberries is all around your soil. I learned something new about strawberries that I hadn't known before, and that was the amount of nutrients they like. So when I created this green stalk, I filled it with Pro Mix. It is fast becoming my favorite soil to use. It is light, it is fluffy, it has a good nutrition in it. I really liked it. Other than Pro Mix, I also put in some perlite, and I also put in some berry tone. Espuma has a berry tone that's just perfect for all kinds of berries, whether it's blueberries, blackberries, mulberries, strawberries. It works for everything. But the thing that I noticed has made the biggest difference, and I'm a little shocked about this, and I don't know if this is something that most people recommend, but it worked for me, so I'm going to tell you what happened. When I got these, I actually didn't get bare root plants. I got live plants off of Facebook Marketplace with a local farmer, kind of like a backyard gardener like me. He used to have a large landscaping company. Now he just grows lots of plants, and I think it's beautiful, his property. But I went there and I picked out his plants and I brought them home and I filled my green stock with them. But I noticed his soil was different. His soil was not like regular soil. It wasn't sandy soil. It wasn't bagged soil. It was straight compost. It was like straight compost. So much compost. There was still like some broken down things happening, and there were huge worms in them. So many, so y'all didn't get to see this on the video when I planted them, that when I tilted the strawberries over and lifted them up and went to tilt them back on my hand to place them, worms were all over my hand, which was freaking gross. But either way, I love worms, but it was unexpected, and I realized very quickly that he was growing these strawberries in straight compost. Nothing else was mixed in. There was no perlite, there was no soil, there was no wood chips, nothing. I was pretty shocked. But they seem to love it. I mean, love it at a level I have not experienced. So what I plan to do is, once I've perennialized these, once I can get them through to next year, I'm actually going to lift them out of the soil and replace, just like immediately surrounding their roots, with compost. So I'm going to take my fresh compost with nothing else. I'm going to still keep these tiers with that Pro Mix, add the berry tone, but right directly under the crowns of these plants, I'm going to fill it with compost, because that seemed to work crazy good. And then besides that, about halfway through the season, I did go through and add another round of berry tone, and at the same time some fish fertilizer. So to add the berry tone is a little bit challenging, but what you can do is, in the top tier it's a little easier. You just take the water basin off, you know, pour the little granules on top, scratch them in. But in each one of these little tiers underneath, you have to kind of scoop out some dirt from the side corner, put some of your, like a teaspoon of berry tone in, cover it back up with the soil, and go around and do that for all 30 pockets, which takes a little bit of time, but thankfully you only have to do this once right through the middle of the season, usually after the first flush of strawberries are starting to slow down, in order to kind of get that big burst from the second strawberries. At the same time, I put some fish fertilizer. I used my regular Alaska's fish fertilizer and threw that into the top with some water into the basin, into the water basin. And that has now created this new fresh flush of the second set of strawberries, which is working perfectly. So that kind of leads into our fourth point, which is watering. I didn't water my strawberries like I did this year in the past. So in the past, I would water them whenever the soil dried out, because that's how most plants are. But I noticed that when I got those strawberries, and they were so healthy and so happy in that compost, that they were basically sopping wet. It was kind of crazy to me. And then I put them in here, and I started to notice that as I let the soil dry out, they didn't look as happy. So I'm like, okay, let's keep you super moist, which really wasn't hard this year, because we had so much rain this winter. It almost felt like our summers, except it wasn't evaporating off. So I had a ton of rain that was coming down, and I kept it significantly watered. I mean, whenever I checked with my moisture meter, it was just barely creeping into the good point, right? So they had the moist, the good, and then the dry. And it was like sitting right at that level of between moist and okay, you're good. I kept it at that the whole time, and they seemed to adore it. And I was worried that so much water would make the berries less sweet, but it hasn't. They have stayed very, very sweet. I think it has helped create some of these monster-sized berries that are fairly sizable, and the biggest I've ever seen, besides the fact that Brilliance is kind of known for a larger sized berry. So some of it is variety, but I think some of it is the watering. So make sure to keep these moist. Don't let them dry out in between watering. And then the fifth tip is all around disease and pest management. It is inevitable. Here in Florida, we have diseases, we have pests, and I experienced both. So I started to notice some fungal issues. Let me see if I can find some. This is maybe an example of it. No. Oh, here. Sorry, you can't see this. I'll give you an up close. But I have a few leaves that have some of the spotting. I believe that that is some sort of fungal issue because of all that moisture in the air that we had this winter. It's been more dry lately, so it has gotten better. And I did go ahead and implement my weekly hydrogen peroxide in water mixture. That is 10 tablespoons of hydrogen peroxide to 1 gallon of water, and I spray all of the leaves of the plants. Doesn't matter. You can do it in the morning, you can do it in the evening, you can do it in the middle of the day. It doesn't seem to burn the plants at all. I'll spray them once a week, and that seems to have curbed things quite a bit. And anytime I see leaves that look a little like they've got some fungal issues, those little dots and discolorations, and I just clip those off, and then it pushes out new leaves and everything is fine. Now, from a pest management perspective, I have been experiencing, yeah, this is kind of an example of it. I'll show you up close. But this is a strawberry that has almost, I don't even know how to describe this, but it almost looks like it's kind of wrinkled. I don't know. It kind of looks like it's wrinkled or dried out is the best way I know how to describe it. It's discolored a little bit. It's still safe to eat, but usually what this is some kind of tiny insect, like your mites or white flies or something like that. Maybe it's a broad mite. I'm not 100% sure which mite it is, but it is a tiny little insect, and you can usually tell by looking at the back of the leaves very, very closely. They're very, very tiny. But if you look at the back of the leaves, or you have strawberries that are coming out like this, more than likely you have a mite issue. And so I use spinoside, and I also have an insecticidal soap. Now, I'm not big on insecticidal soap. I almost never use it. But because I wasn't 100% sure what type of bug this was, I decided to go and use both. When you use insecticidal soap or spinoside or BT, if that's your jam, you want to be careful because, you know, bees like strawberry flowers and those can hurt bees. So I always typically wait until late into the evening when all the good bugs are back home, like bees. They are more active in the morning. So I take a look around, I make sure that there's no bees or anything and that it's right at that dusk hour. They've gone home by then, and that's when I spray. And by the time they show up the next day, it is nice and dry, and that insecticidal soap and the spinoside is not going to bother them as long as it's dry. So don't spray the bees. But I did that once every 3 weeks. Well, this insecticidal soap I sprayed every like 3 to 5 days right at the beginning when I noticed that there was a lot of this happening. And then I backed that off, and both of them, I gave it to them once every 3 weeks. If you're using BT, you're going to have to do it more often because BT does wash off with rain. So if you get rain, you're going to have to go out there and spray right after the rain. That's why I prefer spinoside, is it sticks. It does not get washed away with the rain. Another big thing that helped me with pest and disease this season was, instead of growing them in a raised bed or in ground like I had for many years, I decided to go ahead and do the green stalk. Now, I have tried green stalks in the past and I have not been able to get them to work, but I think I've got it solved now. I think it's soil, I think it's nutrition, I think it's moisture, it's keeping it wet. And it has worked phenomenal. Now, the big reason why it was a harder issue in the beds and in ground is bugs like slugs, snails, lizards, all kinds of stuff want to eat your berries. If they're lifted up like this, they can't get to them. It's harder for them to get to. Easier for you to spot. Less damage is going to occur. So just by lifting them up, whether that's in a green stalk or another type of vertical planter or even hanging planters, all of those are excellent options to keep pests off. And it also will keep disease off, because a lot of the diseases that happen live in the soil. And when water splashes down and then splashes back up on the plant, you're going to get a lot of disease that way. So having them in this way, where the soil is separated from the berries hang outside and not touching the soil, has made a huge impact and reduction of the types of issues I was having before. I mean, when I was growing them before, I didn't get a lot of berries, and 50% of them were taken by either worms, bugs, or disease. So I was only left with 50%, which was basically a quart a season. Ridiculous. These, I'm getting about a pint every day or 2. I have so many strawberries, I don't know what to do with. So that's what we're going to do next. I had a viewer ask me, hey, how do I use a oven for a dehydrator? Well, today we're going to take some of these strawberries inside and we are going to make fruit leather in the oven. Once we've picked our berries, I brought them inside and kind of combined them with some of the berries that I already had in the refrigerator, and we're going to give them a good wash. I normally don't wash my berries right when I bring them inside because I feel like if you leave the dirt on stuff, with anything really in the garden, it seems to last longer that way. So I just kind of put them in a mason jar, and then when I'm ready to use them is when I wash all the dirt off. And so I've chopped up my strawberries, not finely or anything, kind of in big chunks, and I put them into a stock pot. And to the stock pot, I'm going to add, normally the recipe calls for 4 cups of fruit and then a half a cup of water, but I only had 2 cups of fruit, so I added a 1/4 of a cup of water, and then I tested it and it wasn't very sweet. It was more tart than anything, so I went ahead and added about a tablespoon of sugar. The recipe does say that a little bit of lemon juice can kind of bring out the brightness of the flavor, so I added what equated to maybe a teaspoon of lemon juice and then added that, and it really did help. I liked it a lot. Next up, I am going to puree this. So I'm using my little Ninja single serve, but if you had 4 cups of fruit like you should have for this recipe, you'd probably just use a regular blender. I ended up using my little Bravo oven rather than my regular oven, and that's mainly because I couldn't wrap my brain around putting this stuff in my regular oven and having my regular oven being unavailable for 10, 12, 18 hours. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to replicate it in my little Bravo oven. I'm going to put the temperature of my Bravo oven as low as my regular oven will go, because technically my Bravo oven can go much lower. It can go down to 100. But what I did was I kind of matched what my regular oven could do, which was 150 degrees. Now I put it on some parchment paper, and I later learned, and I'll show you why, but I later learned that it would have been better on silicone with the amount of strawberries I was doing. I think if I had done a larger amount of strawberries, the fruit leather would have been thicker, but as you can see here, it's very thin. It's so thin that it's actually really hard to get it off the parchment paper. Silicone, it would have made it easier. I'm not 100% sure if the problem I was having was because of the parchment or because I didn't do a full recipe. And a full recipe would have caused the fruit leather to be thicker and more pliable and easier to come off the parchment. Other people had had success using parchment, so I think it's kind of a combination. I definitely will use silicone in the future. In my dehydrator, I have a silicone mat, and that usually works just fine. But in the oven, you either need to go thicker or you need to use silicone. And what you're seeing here is that my fruit leather ended up coming out more like fruit chips rather than fruit leather. It was still good. It was awesome. I think it tastes amazing, but it's more like a cracker. I hope you guys had fun hanging out with me today. I had a ton of fun hanging out with you, talking all about strawberries. Happy gardening, guys.